I stared at that party room crammed with colleagues and executives as my mind tried to digest what my eyes had just registered. In the center of the dance floor, the woman with whom I had shared years of trust, plans and a lifetime of sacrifices was engaged in a more than intimate embrace with another man. He wasn't just a colleague or a friend, he was her lover. The smiles on both their faces, the closeness of their bodies, the hands that clearly ignored the formality of a social relationship. All of this said, without words, what my soul already knew: I had been betrayed, and not in a silent or discreet way. They were there, exposed, as if my presence at that very event wasn't enough to curb their shamelessness. I felt my chest tighten, a pressure as if something was breaking inside me. The world around me began to lose its sound, the laughter and music drowned out by a cloud of disbelief. The parallel conversations seemed distant, as if they were from another dimension. I stared at the scene for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. I wanted to shout, I wanted to confront, but above all, I felt I needed to act in a calculated way. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that revenge isn't just a response, it's a stage, and mine was set. I walked to the microphone in the center of the hall with firm steps. The sound of the stage wood creaking under my shoes seemed to echo in my mind. Everyone was attentive, their attention focused on me as soon as the microphone's ring broke through the hubbub. My heart beat like a drum, but my voice came out steady, cold as steel. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. This event celebrates more than our professional journey, it reinforces the bonds we have built over the years. However, there is something much more personal that I need to share with you. Everyone fell silent, the laughter died down, and even those furthest from the stage moved closer. In the background, I could see the expression of discomfort on her and her lover's faces. Today, I continued, keeping my gaze fixed on the crowd, but feeling their presence, is not just about celebration. It's about freedom. And to that end, I've decided that this is the perfect moment to announce the end of my marriage. The hall was filled with absolute silence, so dense that it seemed tangible. Everyone stared in shock as I continued. Yes, I'm talking about divorce. I see no reason to postpone the inevitable, especially after what I've witnessed today. The sound of a glass falling and shattering in the background indicated someone's reaction, but I didn't look away. It was then that I decided to face them. I saw her face frozen in panic, her wide eyes seeking refuge in the crowd. He, on the other hand, had an obvious pallor on his face, restless hands, and a lost look, as if he were a student caught cheating in front of the whole class. I realized that my voice was the only thing echoing in the room, filled with a mixture of pain, anger, and relief. Relief because, in that instant, I knew I was in control, even if everything else seemed to be falling apart. To those who think this is just a personal drama, I'm sorry to disappoint you. What's at stake here is not just a husband's betrayed trust, but something much bigger. And I guarantee that when you hear all the details, you'll understand why this evening will be remembered for much more than contracts signed and toasts exchanged. My statement reverberated, and the people around me looked at each other, murmuring. I got off the stage without expecting applause or reactions. I passed her and him, who were now completely motionless, their faces a painting of shame and fear. I hope you enjoy the evening, I muttered as I passed them, with a cold smile, before stepping out into the fresh night air. But what no one knew was that this was only the beginning. Inside me, a volcano of emotions was struggling to find its balance. On the outside, however, I knew I needed to stay calm. On the way home, I reflected on everything this betrayal really meant. It wasn't just the breaking of a sacred bond, it was also an insult to my dignity, a direct affront to my position as a husband, a man and, above all, as a human being. But something told me that there was more to this theater of horrors than I had witnessed. And I was right. When I got home, I went through my recent memories, the moments when I noticed signs of something wrong. The sudden change in behavior, the increase in last-minute meetings, the detachment she tried to disguise with a false dedication. It all made sense now. Every detail fitted into a puzzle that I had never wanted to put together, but which now seemed impossible to ignore. It was when I checked some of her old messages, out of pure instinct, that I realized there was something much bigger at play. Vague references, abruptly interrupted conversations and deleted messages indicated that the affair wasn't just emotional, but had repercussions that went beyond the walls of our home. Everything pointed to something that could destroy not only my marriage, but my reputation, even my career. The question now was no longer how much I had been betrayed, but how deep that betrayal really went. And as I realized this, I felt a new energy wash over me. That story was far from over, and I knew that what came next would leave its mark not only on me, but on everyone who dared to cross that line with me. There was still so much to discover, so many unanswered questions. But one thing was certain, they weren't prepared for what came next, and perhaps neither was I. Welcome to the channel where we explore the depths of the consequences of betrayal. Here, we don't support, justify or romanticize infidelity. The stories are fictional, but they carry a powerful truth: betrayal destroys lives, trust and dreams. Each account is a reminder of the devastating impact of wrong choices. Get ready to dive into an intense and emotional narrative. Take a deep breath and be ready for a story that will stir your emotions and grip you from start to finish. Good story. The living room was bathed in soft light, reflected by the antique chandelier hanging from the center of the ceiling. Sophia was arranging the cushions on the sofa while glancing at the table carefully set for dinner. The aroma of slowly simmering tomato sauce filled the room, a reminder that small rituals still sustained the balance of the home. She glanced at the clock once more, anxiously awaiting the arrival of Daniel, her husband, whose increasingly demanding routine took him away from the moments shared at home. Daniel was a methodical man, an executive who valued punctuality and dedication. In the early years of their marriage, this quality was seen as an irresistible virtue by Sophia. But over time, the intensity of his work became an invisible barrier between them. It wasn't something he did intentionally, Sophia knew that. It was the pressure of maintaining the standard of living they had both built together. Despite this, evenings like this, which Sophia had carefully planned, served as an attempt to recapture the glow of yesteryear. As the clock struck 7:30, she adjusted her hair in front of the hall mirror. Her reflection seemed confident, but her gaze carried the shadow of a doubt. She remembered how Daniel used to compliment her beauty, how his words had the power to make her feel unique. Recently, however, these moments had become scarce, replaced by quick conversations and hurried greetings. Maybe he's just tired, she muttered to herself, adjusting the necklace she was wearing, a present Daniel had given her for her last birthday. Outside, Daniel was parking his car. He had the look of someone who had faced a long and exhausting day, but there was still something about him that exuded determination. He picked up his briefcase, closed the car door and took a deep breath before getting in. Despite the weight of his responsibilities, he knew that Sophia worked hard to keep everything in harmony, and he didn't want to let her down. As he opened the door, he was greeted by the inviting aroma of dinner and his wife's warm smile. "You're just in time," said Sophia, coming up to kiss him. He returned the gesture, although his expression seemed distracted. He put his suitcase in the corner of the room and ran his hand over his face, trying to dispel his tiredness. "Dinner's almost ready." "You must be starving," she continued, trying hard to ignore the slight distance in his eyes. Daniel smiled almost automatically, feeling the weight of something indefinable between them. It wasn't a lack of love, it was more like a slowly growing disconnection, like an invisible crack in a solid surface. He followed her to the table and sat down, trying to focus his attention on the food and the obvious effort Sophia had put in that evening. "It's delicious," he commented after a few bites. Sophia watched his every move, trying to catch any sign that he was really there at that moment. "I'm glad you liked it. I wanted it to be special. It's been a while since we've had a night to ourselves," she said, carefully measuring her words. He nodded, taking a sip of wine. "You're right. I don't think I realize how important these evenings are. Thank you for setting all this up." The words were sincere, but they still sounded distant, as if an invisible wall kept him a few steps away emotionally. Dinner continued with light conversations about Daniel's work and Sophia's artistic projects, as she tried to fill the gaps left by his absence. Although she was happy to have some time together, something inside her told her that Daniel's words didn't carry the same warmth as before. She knew he loved her, but there was something different, something she couldn't define. After dinner, Sophia got up to collect the plates, but Daniel insisted on helping her. It was a subtle attempt to show that he was still there, that he still cared. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, the conversation became easier, almost natural. "Do you remember our trip to Tuscany?" she asked, trying to bring up a memory that might rekindle the connection between them. Daniel laughed softly. "Of course I remember. You almost fell into the river while trying to take that photo of the bridge." The two of them laughed together, and for a brief moment, the weight of everyday life disappeared. Later, while Sophia was organizing the last details in the living room, Daniel received a message on his cell phone. He picked it up discreetly and read it, frowning slightly. "It's from the office," he explained, putting the device in his pocket. Sophia nodded, trying not to show the twinge of frustration she felt. Always so busy, she thought, but decided not to comment. Instead, she sat down next to him on the sofa, trying to enjoy the remaining minutes of the evening she had planned so carefully. As they chatted about trivia, Sophia realized that Daniel was physically present, but his mind seemed to be elsewhere. It was as if he was constantly torn between two worlds, theirs and another that she couldn't reach. Despite this, she refused to give up. She knew that relationships required effort, and she was determined to do her bit. That night, when they went to bed, Sophia watched him in silence. He looked exhausted, but there was something else. An invisible weight that seemed to be pressing down on him, something he didn't share with her. She wanted to ask, she wanted to understand, but she was afraid of the answer. So she just watched him as he fell asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Feeling alone, even next to him, Sophia closed her eyes, trying to convince herself that everything would be all right. The following days followed a similar pattern. Sophia devoted herself to the house, her projects and her attempts to bring Daniel closer, while he divided himself between work and scarce moments of interaction. The relationship seemed to be suspended on a tightrope, balancing between what was and what could be. Neither of them talked about it directly, but they both felt the weight of what wasn't said. That week, Sophia decided to organize an event at home, something small, just for Daniel's work colleagues and a few close friends. She thought it would be a good way to remind them how well they worked as a couple, as hosts. Daniel agreed, albeit with little enthusiasm. He knew that Sophia was trying, and he didn't want to frustrate her efforts. On the night of the event, the house was spotless. Sophia did her best to create a welcoming atmosphere, while Daniel tried to hide the tension he had been carrying around for the last few days. The arrival of the guests brought a brief relief, filling the house with laughter and conversation. But even in the middle of the party, there was something hanging in the air, something that Sophia couldn't quite put her finger on. As she served drinks and circulated around the room, Sophia watched Daniel chatting with a group of colleagues. He seemed animated, almost relaxed, but there were moments when his expression would change, as if an unexpected thought was haunting him. She noticed this more than once during the evening and wondered what could be going on. The party ended late and they both went to bed exhausted. Once again, Sophia felt that silent distance between them, something that neither of them dared to mention. And, although she didn't know it yet, what was to come would change everything. The pace of the next few days seemed to quicken, as if something invisible was moving the world around Sophia and Daniel. The routine, which previously had a certain predictable balance, now seemed fraught with subtle tensions, unspoken words and prolonged silences. Sophia felt it in every gesture, in every glance that Daniel looked away from when she tried to create a moment of connection. Still, she persisted, refusing to accept that anything was really wrong. That morning, as Daniel hurriedly prepared to leave, Sophia watched him from the bedroom door. He had his back to her, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. She wanted to say something, to ask if everything was all right, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. Instead, she smiled slightly and wished him a good morning. He nodded distractedly in return and walked out of the door, leaving only the echoing sound of his footsteps in the hallway. Sophia sighed and returned to her room. The bed was still in disarray, a reflection of how she felt inside. She decided that she needed to occupy her mind. She opened her laptop and immersed herself in the preparations for a new artistic project she had recently taken on. But even there, in the intimacy of her creativity, doubts loomed like shadows, interrupting her concentration. Restlessness seemed to infiltrate every aspect of his life. Later that day, while organizing some papers in his home office, he found a forgotten note in Daniel's coat pocket. It was a simple note, almost trivial, but loaded with implications she couldn't ignore. Date confirmed. Can't wait. M. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the note looked recent. Sophia's heart raced, but she tried to rationalize. Maybe it was something work-related. Maybe it was something completely innocent. Still, something inside her insisted that there was more there than met the eye. It wasn't just the note, it was the set of little signs that she had been ignoring for weeks. The growing emotional distance, the discreet messages on his cell phone, the extended hours at work. Everything seemed to fit together in an uncomfortable way. Despite this, Sophia chose not to confront Daniel immediately. She wanted to be sure, she needed something more concrete before she voiced her suspicions. Over the next few days, she began to pay more attention. She observed how he reacted to the messages he received, how he avoided leaving his cell phone in visible places. Her mind was in constant conflict, torn between the desire to believe that she was imagining things and the need to face the truth. Sophia knew that if she went down this path, there would be no turning back. But the silence was beginning to eat her up inside. An opportunity arose when Daniel mentioned that he had to work late because of an important meeting. Sophia, however, noticed a hesitation in his voice, a calculated pause before mentioning the supposed appointment. She decided that she needed to find out the truth for herself. When he left that evening, she waited a few minutes before picking up her bag and leaving too. She followed Daniel discreetly, keeping a safe distance. Her heart raced when she realized that he wasn't heading for the office, but for a restaurant in the center. She parked the car in a nearby street and watched him enter the place, walking with a confidence that had seemed absent recently. Sophia remained in the car, debating with herself whether to go ahead. However, curiosity and the fear of being right pushed her out of the vehicle. Inside the restaurant, she spotted him sitting at a table in the corner, talking to a woman Sophia had never seen before. They were laughing, leaning towards each other, sharing an intimacy that made her stomach turn. She felt her hands shaking, her body frozen in place, unable to fully process what she was seeing. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the fact that Daniel seemed genuinely comfortable, as if that moment wasn't a detour, but part of a routine. Sophia left the restaurant before anyone could notice her. The cold night air seemed insufficient to calm the storm in her mind. She walked home in silence, her thoughts revolving around the scenes she had just witnessed. Every detail seemed etched into his memory, as if his mind was determined not to let him forget. When Daniel returned later that night, Sophia was already in bed, but she couldn't sleep. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the bedroom door opening. He walked in without saying a word, changed his clothes and lay down next to her. Sophia smelled the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with something more subtle, something that wasn't hers. She closed her eyes tightly, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Now was not the time to confront him. Not yet. Over the next few days, Sophia began to gather more information. She discreetly searched Daniel's cell phone while he was in the shower and found messages exchanged with a woman called Mariana. The words were clear, direct, impossible to misinterpret. The conversations were full of plans, meetings and confessions of an affection that Sophia believed was hers alone. Despite the pain she felt, Sophia decided to keep control. She didn't want to act on impulse, she didn't want to give Daniel the opportunity to distort the facts. She needed a plan, something that would allow her to expose the truth in an undeniable way. And for that, he would wait for the perfect opportunity. That opportunity came during the company party. Sophia knew that Daniel would be there, and the messages he had exchanged with Mariana indicated that she would also attend. As she got ready for the event, Sophia felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. It was as if all the previous moments had brought her to this point. At the party, Sophia watched from afar as Daniel circulated among the guests. He looked relaxed, as if he was completely oblivious to the fact that Sophia knew everything. When Mariana arrived, Sophia recognized her immediately. It was impossible to ignore the way the two of them approached each other, the familiarity in their gestures, the smiles they shared. Sophia remained silent, but every fiber of her being burned with indignation. It was when she saw them together on the dance floor that she knew it was time. The closeness between them, the way Daniel put his hands on Mariana's waist, it all screamed the truth that Sophia had been trying to deny. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding, and walked to the center of the room. Everything around her seemed to freeze as she picked up the microphone and called out to everyone present. Sophia's voice echoed through the hall, clear and firm. "I'd like to take this opportunity to share some important news." All eyes turned to her, and she felt the tension growing in the air. Sophia looked directly at Daniel, whose expression changed from relaxed to alarmed in seconds. He knew. At that moment, he knew that everything was about to fall apart. The room plunged into a heavy silence after Sophia's words, leaving a palpable tension in the air. Daniel was motionless, as if his mind was still trying to process what had just happened. Mariana, next to him, took a few steps back, visibly uncomfortable under the gaze of dozens of people who now knew more than they should have. Sophia remained standing in the center, the microphone still in her hand, her expression resolute, but her insides were in a storm. Her heart was hammering in her chest, each beat reminding her of the enormity of what she had just done. Daniel stepped forward, trying to articulate a response. "Sophia, can we talk?" His voice was tense, almost pleading, but it also carried a hint of desperation. He looked around, seeking refuge in the faces of the guests, but found only surprise and judgment. Mariana lowered her head, avoiding any direct confrontation. "Talk. Now you want to talk?" Sophia retorted, her voice cutting. "How many times have I asked, begged, for an honest conversation? And now, here we are, and the only thing left for me to do is talk in front of everyone, because clearly, in private, you wouldn't listen to me." Her breathing was rapid, but she showed no weakness. This moment was hers, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Daniel tried to approach, but Sophia held up her hand, interrupting him. "Don't make excuses. Not now. Not after everything I've found out." She looked directly at Mariana, whose expression oscillated between regret and embarrassment. "And you? If you think this is going to end well, you're wrong." Mariana finally looked up, her voice hesitant as she tried to answer. "Sophia, I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't mean to hurt you." But her justification sounded empty, almost rehearsed, and only increased Sophia's indignation. "You didn't mean to cause harm. Then what was that?" Sophia retorted, pointing at the two of them. "An oversight? An innocent distraction? You both knew exactly what you were doing, and now you want to convince me that this was a casual mistake." Daniel tried to intervene again, his voice firmer this time. "Enough, Sophia. Let's settle this between us. You don't have to do it here, in front of everyone." But Sophia laughed, a bitter laugh that cut through the air like a blade. "Work it out. Between us? Daniel, there is no us anymore. You destroyed that the moment you decided to betray everything we built together. And now you want me to spare you the embarrassment? No. Not this time. The room was suffocating, the guests caught between the discomfort of witnessing that intimate moment and the irresistible curiosity to know how it would all end. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to regain control of her emotions before continuing. But you know, Daniel, I'm not just surprised by your betrayal, she said, pausing to look deeply into his eyes. What really destroyed me was finding out that this isn't just about me, or about us. Daniel frowned, confused. What do you mean? Sophia gripped the microphone tighter, as if the object was her only anchor at that moment. I went too far to find out the truth. And do you know what I found, Daniel? That Mariana isn't just your lover. She's also the centerpiece of something much bigger, something you thought you could hide from me and everyone here. Daniel took a step back, his expression changing from concern to something closer to panic. What are you talking about, Sophia? I'm talking, she said, pausing deliberately so that her words would sink in, about the contract you signed with her lover, who happens to be using you and our marriage as a tool to siphon funds from the company. I know everything, Daniel. Every detail. A murmur went through the crowd, like a shockwave spreading through the hall. Sophia took a step forward, looking directly at him. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I'd never see the messages, the transfers, the after-hours meetings? I may have ignored your emotional betrayal, but this? That's something you can't hide. Mariana put her hand to her mouth, visibly shaken. Daniel opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. His mind seemed to spin, desperately searching for a way out of the web in which he had become entangled. So, Daniel, Sophia continued, her voice laden with a controlled coldness, what do you have to say now? Are you going to deny it? Are you going to pretend that none of this happened? Or will you finally admit that you chose to destroy not only our marriage, but also your integrity? Daniel shook his head, his voice finally coming out in a hoarse whisper. I didn't know it would go this far. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You didn't know. Sophia replied, her voice rising. So you think that's an excuse? That your ignorance somehow cancels out the fact that you betrayed not only my trust, but also your position as someone who should be trusted? Do you think that comforts me? Daniel's eyes were full of despair now. He looked at Mariana, who seemed equally lost, as if seeking silent confirmation that there was still some chance of turning the situation around. But Sophia understood. She realized how much he still wanted to control the narrative, and that only made her feel more determined. Do you know what's worse? She asked, her voice finally breaking, revealing the pain behind her anger. I would have forgiven you, Daniel. I would have forgiven the betrayal, the mistakes, if you had come to me and been honest. But what you did was bury yourself even deeper in lies, in conspiracies, while making me believe that I was the only one to carry the weight of what was wrong between us. She took a deep breath, the tears now starting to fall, but she didn't give in. But it's over. You've lost everything, Daniel. Our marriage, my trust, and, soon, your reputation. Because I'm going to make sure that everyone knows exactly who you are. Daniel fell silent, his expression now marked by a mixture of defeat and regret. He knew that Sophia was right, that there was no escaping what was to come. And as the silence hung over the room, everyone present understood that this was the end of something, and the beginning of a truth that no one could ignore. The silence that fell after Sophia's words was almost unbearable. Daniel, standing in the center of attention, seemed to shrink under the weight of the accusations. His eyes scanned the crowd for support, but found only expressions of shock, indignation and contempt. Mariana stood in a corner, motionless, as if she wanted to disappear. The atmosphere, once bright with laughter and lively conversation, was now saturated with the tension of a truth that could not be ignored. Sophia lowered the microphone, but her presence still dominated the space. She felt everyone's gaze on her, waiting for more, but at that moment, all she wanted to do was get out of there. The air felt suffocating, and the muffled sound of the murmurs around her seemed to grow louder by the second. When she took a step away, it was Daniel who broke the silence. "Sophia, please wait." Her voice sounded desperate, but she didn't stop. "I need to explain, please. I've made mistakes, I know, but you don't understand everything." She turned slowly, her eyes burning with anger and disappointment. "Understand what, Daniel? That you lied? That you betrayed my trust? That you put our lives on the line for something as dirty as this? What else is there to understand?" He took a few steps towards her, raising his hands in a gesture almost of surrender. "I was wrong, yes, but it's not like you're imagining. I didn't know that Mariana was involved in this. Not until it was too late." Mariana finally raised her head, her voice trembling. "Daniel, you have to stop. There's no point in continuing to lie." Sophia frowned, moving forward a few steps to face Mariana closely. "Then talk. Tell the truth. Because, frankly, I'm sick of hearing lame excuses." Mariana hesitated, looking at Daniel as if to ask for permission. He shook his head negatively, but Sophia stepped forward, cutting the space between them. "You have nothing left to lose, Mariana. Speak." Mariana took a deep breath, avoiding Daniel's gaze. "It all started as an attempt to gain influence. I was directed by someone above me to get close to Daniel. He was the key to the contracts we wanted. At first, that's all it was about, gaining his trust, getting him to let his guard down. But, things got out of hand." Sophia felt her stomach turn. "So everything was a manipulation? Even the affair?" Mariana lowered her eyes, unable to answer. Daniel intervened, his voice laden with frustration. "It wasn't like that, Sophia. She's distorting things. I knew there were interests, but I didn't know the extent of it." "You didn't know?" Sophia repeated, incredulous. "You want me to believe that you fell into this trap out of innocence? Daniel, you're not naive. You chose this. You chose to lie. You chose to betray. And now you want to convince me that you were a victim? Don't insult me any further." The murmurs in the crowd were intensifying, and Sophia knew that chaos was brewing. She took a deep breath, controlling the urge to just run. "This ends here," she said, her voice firm. "I won't allow another word of deceit to come out of either of your mouths. And as for you, Daniel, I hope you've prepared yourself for the consequences." She turned and started to leave the hall, but Daniel ran after her, grabbing her arm. "Sophia, please. We can sort this out." She pulled hard on his arm, freeing herself. "Work it out. Daniel, you've broken everything. There's nothing left to sort out." He looked around, realizing that all eyes were on them. "Not here. Please. Let's talk at home." "At home?" Sophia laughed bitterly. "What house, Daniel? The one you've turned into a stage for lies? There's nothing there to talk about." She left without looking back, leaving Daniel alone in the center of the room. Mariana remained where she was, her expression now a mixture of shame and sadness. The tension in the room did not subside, and the guests began to leave discreetly, whispering among themselves as they moved away from the spectacle they had just witnessed. Outside, the night air seemed cooler, but it wasn't enough to ease the weight on Sophia's chest. She walked quickly to her car, feeling the tears threatening to escape. As she got into the vehicle, she slammed her hands on the steering wheel, anger and despair finally boiling over. How had everything come to this? How had the person she trusted most become such a distant stranger? As she drove away from the scene, her mind was filled with questions. Not just about Daniel and Mariana, but about herself. How had she allowed this to happen? When had she started ignoring the signs? But above all, what would she do now? The future seemed like unknown terrain, and the only certainty she had was that it wouldn't be the same as before. Arriving home, Sophia collapsed on the sofa, feeling the weight of every word spoken that night. Her eyes wandered around the room, landing on objects that once symbolized happy moments and now seemed to be just empty memories. But before he could get completely lost in his thoughts, his phone vibrated. It was a message. From Mariana. "We need to talk. There's more you need to know." Sophia stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a new wave of tension forming. What else could there be? She hesitated, but eventually answered. "Tomorrow. Coffee at 10. As she hung up the phone, Sophia felt a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity. As much as she wanted to put everything behind her, she knew she needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal. And, above all, she needed to figure out how to rebuild herself amidst the wreckage. The sound of coffee being poured into a cup echoed in the small room, contrasting with the tense silence that hung between Sophia and Mariana. Sitting face to face, the two women were like pieces of a distorted puzzle, linked by an event that neither of them wanted, but from which they could not escape. Sophia watched Mariana with attentive eyes, evaluating every movement, every expression. She didn't know if she was ready to hear more, but she knew she needed to. There was something about that meeting that seemed decisive, as if the answers she was looking for were only minutes away from being revealed. "Thank you for coming," Mariana began, her voice low, almost hesitant. She held her cup tightly, as if the warmth of the coffee was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. "I know you don't trust me, and rightly so. But I couldn't leave it like that." Sophia crossed her arms, maintaining a cold tone. "Why now, Mariana? You had enough time to prevent everything from coming to this. Why did you decide to speak up only after you'd been exposed?" Mariana sighed, her shoulders slumping in a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of her decisions. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything. And, at the same time, afraid of continuing to be part of it. I didn't know things would take such a turn. By the time I realized it, I was already too involved." Sophia leaned forward slightly, her voice filled with indignation. "Are you saying that you were dragged into this like a victim? Mariana, you're not naive. You chose to get involved with Daniel, you chose to lie, you chose to manipulate. Don't try to blame the circumstances alone." Mariana bit her lip, clearly struggling to keep her composure. "I know," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "I know I'm guilty. But there are things you don't know, Sophia. Things that could change everything you think about Daniel and what happened." Sophia arched an eyebrow, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "And what exactly would that be?" Mariana hesitated, as if the words were stuck in her throat. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "When it all began, my goal was simple, to gain his trust. I knew he had access to valuable information for the company. But over time, I realized that there was something strange. He was being pressured." Sophia narrowed her eyes, her expression hardening. "Pressured by whom?" "By the man I worked for. He didn't just want the company's information. He wanted to destroy Daniel, ruin his career, his reputation. And it wasn't just for business. There was something personal about it." Mariana's words fell like a bombshell, but Sophia refused to be carried away by emotions alone. "And what did you do? Did you know about it and carry on? Did you let it be used?" "Yes," Mariana replied, her voice laden with shame. "I carried on because I thought I could control the situation. I thought I could avoid the worst. But eventually I lost control." Sophia was silent for a moment, processing what she had heard. Part of her wanted to believe that Mariana was just trying to save her own skin, but another part couldn't ignore the sincerity in her voice. Still, none of this justified what she and Daniel had done. "So, what do you expect me to do with this information?" Sophia asked, her voice cold. "Do you think it changes anything? That it diminishes the betrayal? That it erases everything you've done?" Mariana shook her head, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Sophia. I just wanted you to know the truth. Because, at the end of the day, Daniel is just as much a victim as you are. And, despite everything, he still loves you. He never wanted it to end like this. Sophia felt a knot tighten in her throat, but refused to show any weakness. Love? Do you really think that love justifies lies, betrayal and manipulation? If he loved me, he would have protected me. He would have told me the truth from the start. Instead, he took the easy way out. And now we're all paying the price. Mariana remained silent, unable to answer. Sophia realized that she had reached a point of no return. There was nothing more to be said there. She stood up slowly, picking up her bag. I hope you find a way to fix your life, Mariana. Because, honestly, I still don't know how I'm going to fix mine. Leaving Mariana behind, Sophia left the cafe and took a deep breath, trying to relieve the tension that seemed to have taken over her body. But no matter how hard she tried, Mariana's words echoed in her mind. Daniel being pressured. A man trying to ruin her life. She didn't want to believe that he could be a victim. Not after everything. When she got home, she found Daniel sitting on the sofa, his hands intertwined and his eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller, as if the guilt and weight of the latest revelations had drained all the energy from him. Sophia closed the door without saying anything and walked into the living room. Did you know Mariana was coming to see me? She asked, her voice controlled but sharp. Daniel looked up, surprised. She spoke to you. What did she say? She said that you were being pressured. That there was something bigger at stake. Is that true? Daniel hesitated, silence filling the space between them. Finally, he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry years of frustration. It's true, he admitted. But that doesn't change what I did. It doesn't change the fact that I lied to you. It doesn't change the fact that I betrayed you. Then why didn't you tell me? Sophia asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why didn't you trust me? Because I was afraid, he replied, his voice low. Afraid of losing you. Afraid that you would never forgive me. And, in the end, that's exactly what happened. Sophia felt tears burning her eyes, but she held them back. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to give him one more reason to think he could fix things with words. Daniel, the problem isn't just what you did. It's what you chose not to do. You chose fear, you chose lies. And now, it's too late. He bowed his head, defeated. I know. But I still had to tell you the truth. Because, despite everything, I still love you. Sophia turned, walking towards the bedroom. Love isn't enough, Daniel. Not after this. As she closed the door behind her, she felt the weight of everything that had happened fall on her. The betrayal, the lies, the revelations. It all seemed too much to bear. But at the same time, she knew she had to move on. Not for him, but for herself. The days following the confrontation were marked by a dense, uncomfortable silence. Sophia had decided to distance herself, not just physically, but emotionally, from everything that still connected her to Daniel. She started living in a small apartment she rented, surrounded by her works of art and an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. The divorce proceedings started quickly, each step bringing to light new details that only reinforced how much the relationship had deteriorated before it even reached breaking point. Daniel, on the other hand, saw his life fall apart at a rapid pace. When the company discovered his involvement with Mariana and his misuse of confidential information, it opened a formal investigation. He was dismissed almost summarily, his name tarnished and his reputation destroyed. The pride he had always carried in his career was now a shadow of what it had been, and he found himself trapped in a cycle of regret and self-pity. Mariana, in an unexpected move, decided to cooperate with the authorities to reduce her responsibility in the scam. Her confession detailed how she had been used as a piece in a much bigger game, but also how she had consciously chosen to get involved. Despite her justifications, she was prosecuted along with those responsible for masterminding the scheme and faced severe consequences, including the loss of her career and freedom for some time. The loneliness she felt during those months on trial was a reflection of what she had caused in others, especially Sophia. Sophia gradually began to rebuild her life. Her art became an escape valve, a space where she could transform the pain and betrayal into something tangible, something that would give her back control over her own story. She began exhibiting her work in local galleries, receiving praise for her ability to capture raw and honest emotions. It was at one of these exhibitions that she met someone who effortlessly brought back a sparkle she thought was lost forever. He was discreet, someone who admired her work from afar before approaching to praise one of her pieces. What began as a casual conversation evolved into something deeper. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt seen, understood, without having to carry the burden of explaining her story. This new relationship wasn't about forgetting the past, but about building something new, with solid and transparent foundations. Daniel tried to get back together with Sophia on more than one occasion, but found a woman who had already moved on. He insisted, trying to convince her that there was still something to salvage, but each attempt was met with the same firmness. "I'm no longer the woman you knew, Daniel. And you're not the man I thought you were either," was Sophia's final response before cutting off contact for good. He, now alone, spent months reflecting on his choices. He sought therapy, something he had avoided for years, and began to confront the parts of himself that had led him to make such destructive decisions. The process was slow, painful, but necessary. Although he would never be able to fully repair the damage he had caused, Daniel began to understand that the real job was to learn to be someone better, even if it never brought Sophia back. Mariana, after serving her sentence, disappeared from the spotlight. She moved far away, looking for a new start in a place where no one knew her name or her story. She carried the scars of her choices, but also a new determination never to repeat the mistakes of the past. It wasn't redemption, but an attempt at silent reconstruction. Sophia, for her part, found a new balance. Her work as an artist gained recognition beyond expectations, and her new relationship brought a kind of peace she didn't know she needed. Most importantly, she learned to appreciate the woman she had become, someone who had survived betrayal, pain and chaos, and emerged stronger, more sure of herself. In the end, each of them went their own way, dealing with the consequences of their actions in ways that reflected their choices and their regrets. The story that began with a public betrayal ended with an intimate lesson for everyone involved: the price of dishonesty is always charged, sooner or later, and every decision, no matter how small, carries the power to transform entire lives. And now we want to know, what did you think of this story? Leave a comment and share your opinion on the outcome. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Here, we never support betrayal, but we explore its consequences to remind us that choices have weight and that trust is a foundation that, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. See you next time.